Welcome. In the face of chronic scarcity, diversity, and conflict, effective managers have to build a base of support and working relations among allies and opponents. This session will focus on how the manager as politician exercises 4 key skills. First, agenda setting. Agenda setting is about knowing what you want and how you're going to try and get it. It also involves defining a vision or objective and articulating a strategy for achieving that vision. Second, mapping the political terrain focuses on determining the channels of informal communication, as well as identifying principal agents of political influence. Third, networking and forming coalitions involves analyzing possibilities for mobilizing internal and external players. And fourth, bargaining and negotiating involves anticipating opposition and negotiating with allies and adversaries to accomplish your agenda. Now let's take a closer look at agenda setting. An agenda in political terms is a statement of interests and a scenario for getting it done. Leaders are most effective when they know what they want and set an agenda that has 2 basic elements: vision and strategy. Bowman and Deal note that a vision without a strategy is an illusion. Creating a vision should balance the long-term interests of key parties, include a strategy for accomplishing it, acknowledge competing internal and external forces, and address concerns of major stakeholders. It also reflects the intimate tie between gathering information and developing a vision. Creating a vision involves a collaborative process that incorporates long-term, legitimate interests of people in the organization. When there is a close match between the values, beliefs, and attitudes of leaders and those led, more power and legitimate authority is accorded to the manager or the leader, and hence generate support for their vision. Developing a strategy for achieving the vision must consider relevant organizational and environmental forces. In other words, understanding the context and mapping the political terrain. Force field analysis may help identify the driving and restraining forces and help you ascertain whether or not you'll be able to implement your agenda. Let's take a brief look at what we mean by mapping the terrain. Acting politically to advance your agenda requires a good understanding of the players, who's in the game, power, who has it, how much, and whether they will use it, and interests, what does each player want. These elements help describe the political force field. The idea of force field analysis was developed by Kurt Lewin as a useful tool to help understand change and equilibrium in organizations. His model includes mapping 2 opposing sets of forces, driving forces and restraining forces. Driving forces are those that support your agenda. Restraining forces are those that oppose or resist your initiative. When they're in balance, we have equilibrium or no change. A change in one of these forces will signal some form of change in the organization. The next slide provides visual image of these forces, and the following slide provides a framework for you to use in analyzing your own organization. Take a moment and try it out. There are several agenda-building strategies that you may find useful. Leaders must be familiar with the major stakeholders and know their values, goals, and needs. To accomplish this, you'll need to be an active listener. Covey said that you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in proportion. Agendas that focus on launching an innovation or change initiative must address concerns of organizational members. When the manager or leader articulates congruency between the present direction of the organization and the proposed change, stakeholders may support it. Lindblom developed the theory of incrementalism in policy and decision-making. He posits that change is under most circumstances evolutionary rather than revolutionary. He suggests that many small policy changes that are enacted over time may add up to a more significant policy change. In addition, incremental changes are more acceptable to participants than large, dramatic changes. Network and coalition building are the touchstones of effective politics. Cotter identifies 4 basic steps for handling the political dimensions of managerial work. First, identify relevant relationships. Who needs to be led? Second, assess who might resist cooperation. Why are they resisting? How strongly are they opposed? Determine where the leadership challenges will be. Third, develop relationships with people to facilitate communication and educate others as part of the negotiating process to reduce resistance. And fourth, if this step fails, you may have to use either more subtle or more forceful methods. Save your big guns for last. The political frame emphasizes that the leader needs a power base to enact their agenda. That can only be accomplished with the support of large numbers of people. The higher the level of leadership, the greater the need to be viewed as credible and competent by others who will support your agenda. Here are some specific tasks that you'll need to complete. Task 1. Identify those who can help you. Task 2. Develop relationships with key people, interest groups, and coalitions. Task 3. Promise rewards or resources for their support. Task 4. Get the blessing from those above you in the organization who have the most influence on decisions on the issue at hand. Present a polished, substantive, and technically correct overview because senior administrators will have to determine, first, is it a good idea? And second, how will my constituents react to it? Task 5. Formalize the coalitions and report back to your superiors specific plans for pursuing the project. You need friends and allies to get things done, but you also need to be careful not to underestimate or provoke people when you don't know how much power they have or who their friends are. Making this mistake may end your change effort or even jeopardize your career. As I mentioned, bargaining and negotiating are central to being politically effective. Bargaining is central to decision-making processes in organizations, and negotiation is called for whenever 2 or more parties have some interests in common and other interests in conflict, yet they need to reach an agreement. In many respects, both bargaining and negotiations involve working with coalitions. A caveat of working with coalitions is that they tend to shift membership depending on the issue at hand. In other words, those you oppose today may be valued allies tomorrow. So keep your focus on the issue and don't alienate opponents, and above all, avoid personal ad hominem attacks. The whole point of effective politics is getting to yes. One of the best known win-win approaches to negotiation was developed by Fisher and Urey in their 1981 book, Getting to Yes. They contend that managers tend to use positional bargaining and fail to reach agreement. In positional bargaining, managers take a position and then make concessions. This approach produces poor outcomes. Fisher and Urey argue that principled bargaining is more successful and built around 4 strategies. First, separate the people from the problem. In other words, avoid anger and personal attacks and focus on the problem and its merits. Second, focus on interests, not on positions. In other words, don't lock into a position because you might overlook ways to achieve your goal. Third, invent options for mutual gain. In other words, look for new possibilities that might bring advantages to both sides. And fourth, insist on standards of fairness for both sides in terms of substance and procedures. Here's the point. Focus on finding solutions that are acceptable to both sides. In other words, win-win. Now let's look at value claiming as a negotiating strategy. Schilling's work focuses on how to make a credible threat. Value claiming provides its own slant on the bargaining process and involves 6 components. First, bargaining is a mixed motive game. Both parties want an agreement, but have differing interests and preferences. What is valuable to one is insignificant to the other. Second, bargaining is a process of interdependent decisions. What each party does will affect the other, and each party wants to predict what the other will do while limiting the other's ability to reciprocate. Third, controlling others' uncertainty gives power. Keep your thoughts to yourself. Emphasize threats, not sanctions. Avoid carrying them out because you'll probably find that they're costly. Threats are only effective if they're credible. Threats work if your opponent believes it. Non-credible threats will weaken your position. And sixth, calculate the optimal level of threat. Too much or too little can undermine your position. Creating and claiming value are both intrinsic to the bargaining process, and the manager must decide how to balance the two to get to win-win situation. Creating and claiming value are both intrinsic to the bargaining process, and the manager must decide how to balance the two to get to a win-win situation. If you have to work with these individuals again, try to avoid scorched earth tactics that will jeopardize building networks and coalitions in the future. An important question to ask is, what works? Axelrod found that a strategy of conditional openness works best when negotiators need to work together over time. This strategy starts with open collaborative behavior and maintains the approach as long as it is reciprocated. If the other party becomes adversarial, the negotiator responds in an adversarial manner until the opponent makes a collaborative move. In other words, it's tit for tat. Politics is also about empowerment. Bloch and others explore ethical issues in bargaining and organizational politics. They assert that a manager or leader may benefit from creating an image of greatness that captures the initial enthusiasm and commitment of participants. If this is accompanied by a vision, as well as efforts to accomplish it by working with and through others and building trust, people may view it as a positive political act. Bowman and Deal note that reculturing organizations by putting in place policies and procedures that promote empowerment takes time, but is also very worthwhile. They suggest that managers consider treating friends and opponents differently. Although you can count on the support of your friends, adversaries tend to be difficult and resist pressure. They offer 4 steps that may help in dealing with them, including, first, tell them your vision. Second, state your best understanding of their position. Third, identify your contribution to the problem. And fourth, Tell them what you plan to do without making demands. This is a variation of Axelrod's conditional openness and also reflects principles of Argyris and Schön's Model 2. Let's take a brief look at morality and politics. The line between positive and negative politics is at best a tightrope that we have to walk. Bowman and Deal make several observations that may prove useful. First, individuals can empower themselves through an understanding of organizational politics and discovering a positive way of being political. Second, bureaucratic organizations often leave individuals feeling vulnerable, powerless, and helpless. In these circumstances, people are afraid that power will be used against them, and they will in turn develop political strategies to protect themselves. Third, to avoid this dilemma, managers and leaders need to develop organizational structures, policies, and procedures that promote empowerment. In turn, leaders will be empowered by those led. Lax and Sabinius see ethical issues as inescapable quandaries, but also provide a set of questions that may be used to assess a manager or leader's actions. First, ethical criteria. Are they used in bargaining and organizational politics? Second, mutuality. Are all parties operating under the same understanding of the rules? Third, generality. Does a specific action follow a principle of moral conduct applicable to all comparable situations? Fourth, openness. Are we willing to make our decisions public? And fifth, caring. Does this action show care for the legitimate interests of others? Although these questions don't constitute a comprehensive ethical framework, they do provide a set of principles that may be used to judge whether or not your actions are moral. In sum, the question is not whether organizations are political, but what kind of politics they will encompass. Politics can be sordid and destructive, but they can also be a vehicle for achieving noble purposes. But to accomplish these ends, managers need to develop the skills of constructive politicians, including having the capacity to fashion an agenda, map the terrain, create a network of support, and negotiate with allies and adversaries. Their ability to collaborate with others, understand the importance of long-term relationships, as well as their own values and ethical principles, will in large measure to determine their success in managing organizational change and innovation.